Hello and welcome to another edition of the Language Fuel podcast. We are in series 2. I think this is our second one in series 2. It's been a little bit of a break between podcasts, partly because we've been a bit busy, but partly because I've yet to find the perfect place to do these podcasts. At the office, it's getting a bit busy. You may or may not know, we work from a shared office space and there's a lot of people kind of coming and going. So it's less quiet in there and less able to kind of record in there. And then I just realized that here at home, we have this workshop. As you can see, we've got a whole bunch of things, work in progress. We've got paintings, we've got kind of hardware stuff. And I thought to myself, although it doesn't look pretty, it's actually a metaphor, a little bit of a metaphor for what we do here at Language Fuel, which is sharpening the saw. Literally, we've got over on the wall there some saws. And I thought, you probably are familiar with that Stephen Covey book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of them is sharpening the saw. And of course he looks at the story of the woodcutter who goes out, and the first day he's super productive, the second day he's a little bit less productive, and someone says, hey, you need to sharpen your saw, and the guy says, I haven't got time to sharpen the saw, I've got to cut all these woods. But of course the irony is that if he sharpened it, he'd be faster and more effective. And I think that's the same with any profession, anyone. We all need to do that. We need to look after ourselves professionally and personally. So I kind of think, Language Fuel's doing that on a professional level for language teachers, and of course for language learners as well. We have some self-directed language learning courses and things like that. So I thought, why not just come into the workshop? It's quiet. I think it's all right in terms of sound quality and whatnot. And the metaphor is just loud and clear right there in the back. And we're all a little bit messy. This room's a little bit messy. Everybody, we're just human. So here we are. Enough about that. Inspiration has struck for another episode. And today I want to talk a little bit about an article that I read recently. And that article was published on the 18th of May by Sarah Priestley. And she had been at ELT Jam, which I understand, I've never been there myself, I understand was a group of people who got together to discuss English language teaching. And it was written up, I suppose, as a blog post or whatever it was. I'll put the link in the show notes so you can read it, the first hand yourself. It's really quite a good article. Anyway, so Sarah says basically, and I agree with her, that there is an assumption in English language teaching, two assumptions really. First of all, that students need to have fun in order to learn. And secondly, that students want fun activities all the time. Now, just to clarify, she says that she has nothing at all against having fun, and I would agree with that if you've been listening to the podcast or seen some of the things we've been writing. I'm a big fan of games. I love it. There's nothing at all intrinsically wrong with having fun in the classroom. Just let's make that clear. But what she was saying is, if you look at the kinds of things that get published, she mentions a couple of real classic books that we've all, used or read in the English teaching classroom. One of which is actually written by a friend of mine, so I'm certainly not wanting to bag it at all. But yeah, there is this big assumption that in order to be effective teachers, we've got to make our classes fun. And her point is that the two assumptions in there, one, that it has to be fun, and two, that students want fun activities all the time, are actually false. So I wanted to have a quick look at that, and I'd love your feedback, love to know what you think about it. So do students need to have fun, or does the class need to be fun in order for students to learn? And the answer, of course, is no. But what it's trying to get at, I think, why people have gone down this fun road so much, is that there definitely needs to be engagement. Students need to be, actively paying attention and super involved in what's happening in the classroom. That, for sure, is a prerequisite to learning. If they're not paying attention, they're not going to learn anything. So fun has as a prerequisite engagement, but you can have engagement in ways that aren't necessarily traditionally what we would call fun activities or game-like, people laughing and that sort of thing. In fact, Zoltan Dornier, and apologies if I've pronounced that wrong, he's written a lot about motivation. He and Jill Hadfield wrote a book on motivation in the classroom and have wonderful activities to spark student motivation. He spoke recently at the TESOL convention that was in Chicago in March, so a couple of months ago. He was one of the keynote speakers. I think it might have been even the last day, if I recall correctly. And he sort of said, I've kind of moved on from motivation because there's something a little bit more important than motivation in the classroom. And he said that is engagement. And the reason, we've all kind of known that engagement's not a new thing. But what he's saying is that it's suddenly become huge in our modern environment in which we're teaching. Students, to get engagement, to get their attention even, we're competing against so many things. Not the least of which is attention spans. Obviously, attention spans are much shorter in this kind of digital instant age. Click here to do this, click here and we're done. But, people have got their mobile phones on, and that itself is another whole topic of debate. Should we have mobile phones available in classrooms? And obviously the answer is going to be contextual. In some high schools, the rules that apply to a teenager will be quite different to the rules you'd apply to an adult in a night school setting, where they might have a babysitter looking after their children and need to be contactable. So I don't want to answer whether or not people should have mobile phones. It's going to be different in every situation. But the point is, we do have them. Often they're in the classroom, and we're competing against social media, even online learning, which obviously I'm a big fan of, because we've developed a bunch of courses online for language teachers and language learners to help them improve their practice. Someone's sitting with all the best intentions of the world to work through a course to sharpen the saw, to increase their engagement. They probably do have their cell phone sitting right with them. And there's pings from Facebook and there's pings from Twitter. So just getting their attention and helping them be engaged with what they're learning is a really difficult task. So he's actually writing a book on it, and I can't wait till it comes out. I can't remember when he said it would be published, but it's something I definitely will get into the resource room here in New Zealand, so that you guys can read what he has to say and the research that he's done there. So fun can be a way to engage students, but it's not the only way to create engagement. Then, when I was sort of processing and thinking about that, I wanted to talk about how this whole idea of engagement fits into one of the really classic instructional design models, which is Gagne, Briggs and Wagner, 1992. And I'll put the link in the bottom of the show notes as well under this episode. So Gagne has 9 steps of instructional activities. It's one of those kind of classic things that once you know it, it's like, well, that's sort of obvious, but I'm conscious it's very big in the e-learning world, and that's kind of, where I've come across it, even though I had been teaching for many years. So I thought I'd kind of bring that into the equation today. And in fact, we're going to make this a series of podcasts talking through Gagne's 9 steps of instruction, because it gives you a good sort of framework to build any lesson on. And the reason why I'm starting with that is because the number one thing, the very top of his list, the first thing that any instruction has to include is gaining the attention of the students. And that is the core. If people are not paying attention, they will not learn, full stop. So whatever you do, however you are teaching, whether it's a fun game or whether it's a more serious type of a lesson, however your learners are, whether they have mobile phones or whether they don't have mobile phones in the classroom, you've got to gain their attention as the very first thing that you do. So let's have a quick think about this. Step number 1. What else catches people's attention? Certainly, your attention is kept when you are playing a game, because there's motivation, there's points to be had, there's a bit of competition and that sort of thing. What else could it be? It can be something very simple, like asking a question at the very beginning of the lesson. When people hear a question, whether they're conscious of it or not, their brain will try to think of the answer. So that is a really good way of quickly engaging their brain by asking them a question. It's quite simple. And meeting their needs. When an adult realizes that they have a need and you're about to meet it, they're very highly motivated to pay attention. So being really clear about what the need is that you're about to meet, what the problem is that you're about to solve in your language class. So how do you do that? Obviously, when you're teaching a language that is not, if you don't have a language in common with your students, you might need to use pictures for that. So showing them a scenario, they're standing in the post office in the queue, and they're looking at, which denomination of stamp, not that we use stamps these days. I'm just trying to think of an example, an everyday situation where a student finds themselves in, and you're about to give them the language that they need to go through the motions of that particular situation in their life. That would be highly motivating for someone who knows that they need that language. So posing a realistic situation that the learner wants to navigate, but at the moment cannot navigate due to lack of language. So your learning objectives, and that's going to come a little bit later in Gagne, we're going to talk about that. But rather than saying something like, today we are going to practice the present perfect. Like, seriously, that is just totally not engaging, as they don't even know what that even means probably. So rather than that, you're going to say, we're going to talk about things we've done in the past, or whatever it is. It's really, you connect it to a story rather than labeling it with linguistic terms. I love linguistic terms. I'm the first person to talk about them and use them because they're very helpful. And I obviously enjoy talking about languages in that way. But from a learning perspective, you don't want to hit them with these technical terms and jargon. You want to get to the story, the reason why they need to learn that, rather than what it is they're going to learn. All right, so those are a couple of examples of how you can gain their attention. The second, just to go back to the article that we started off with today, the second assumption that she says is kind of in there is that learners want to have fun. Now, it's so generic, I can't necessarily verify or deny that. And, it really depends on the situation. I would hesitate to, but probably would put out there that younger learners might be more happy to engage in a game very quickly. That's kind of how they interact with one another all the time on the playground and so on. Whereas adults, I think, are a little bit more motivated by getting a return on their investment. Often the adults have paid the money to be in your language class, so they want to see the results. And so if you can somehow get their motivation based on the results that they'll see rather than the fun that they're going to have, you might have a little bit more success in there. Anyway, that's it. That's my very short commentary on that wee article. It was a great article, as I said. I'll put it in the show notes. So I do appreciate it. And my recommendation for you is to think of a very quick way to capture somebody's attention at the beginning of any lesson or segment of a lesson. And work with activities which are based as close as possible on real life. That's quite engaging and attention catching. Final comment related to that in terms of games. There's also a big kind of talk in the e-learning world in particular, which I'm connected into. Do we need to gamify things? And I guess this is a question I have for you, specifically for those of you who are premium members of the Language Fuel Academy, our training site. We have the options. We're actually looking at a platform at the moment that has the option of putting gamified features in. You get points and there's leaderboards and that sort of thing. Some people find that incredibly motivating, some don't. I'd love to hear your feedback on whether that's something you'd like to see or not in the Language Fuel Academy. Anyway, give me some feedback on that. Leave a message below. I will put with this series of podcasts a quick summary of Gagne's 9 steps of attention in terms of instructional design, and that first one is gaining the attention. So we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Language Fuel podcast. You can see more at www.languagefuel.com/podcast, or you can see us on YouTube at youtube.com/languagefuel.